Hey, John.
Hey,
Hey, Demetra.
Hello,
How are you?
both.
Demetra, I have been. It's funny because we haven't spoken this way since November when I was in a
Yeah.
warm house in Oklahoma City, and but I think of you all the time because I'll tell you a story. Houston Smith, famous comparative religions professor, was going on a worldwide tour, and he wanted to get things on Shintoism and Hinduism and all these things. And he went to people in those religions and said, who should I read? And every one of them said the same man's name. They said Fritjof Schuon. And so that was his introduction to Schuon. Was everybody was saying, read that guy. Well, for me, in the last month, it's been everything that I'm interested in. There's Demetra for me. And then Mimi, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, there she is again in miniature books. Oh yeah, Demetra Fimi. What? Demetra Fimi, oh, mythology and something.
Surely that's not true.
It's like, oh my gosh, but I know her. So anyway, I've been looking at your stuff. I've been reading your things online at your marvelous Substack, Elvis Craft. I was just like, wow, this is great. And so I said to Nick, well, maybe instead of just reading her and talking about her behind her back, maybe we should call her and talk to her about all these things. So thank you so much for making time today. I know it's a busy day for you. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, down below, you'll see all the things about Demetra Fimi. I know she has to run, so I'm not going to give you all of her book titles and all of these things, but they're down below. Find out all about her. Really the only person in the world who has a tenured position at a prestigious university teaching fantasy literature. Oh my goodness. The one and only. All right.
Thanks for having me, by the way. It's lovely to be here. Seriously, it's been a while.
It's great
well,
to have you.
And your comments in our threads. I mean, really, serious strikers everywhere.
At the moment, the problem is it's been such a mad semester where I've been listening. I don't think I've missed anything, but sometimes I've listened to things like 2 weeks after they've gone. So I'm trying to play catch up, and by the time I've thought of stuff, it's gone again. So I'm sure I've thought of all sorts of other things that I haven't had a chance to put down in comments.
Okay. Well, I hope we can get some of those things out of you today. I've got to forgive me. I've got to pull up our questions. Unless Nick has them right in front of him. Nick always is so much better prepared for these things.
I have them. So, John, you were going to ask. Jumping right in then. Two of the charms on the Strike 9, or we can now call it a Sleep Tight Evangeline bracelet, are your areas of expertise. So we have the Psalter. And do catch it. And anyone out there who hasn't seen it, we had a wonderful conversation. It's two-parter with Elizabeth talking about these charms. And there's also the head of Persephone. Now, John has, I think, rightly urged our viewers and readers to read miniature books in children's fantasy and a kind of elvish craft, which is your Substack. And we that was last November, but then you asked on our Substack, you asked me if I could use my detective skills, such as they are, to try and find out the dimensions of the Psalter charm. So if anyone out there hasn't read Dimitri's miniature books post, could you share with us?
What is this all about?
What is your expertise?
Why
do you get into this?
About dimensions. So I think I might have mentioned that back in November. I can't remember now, but I'm working on a new book on children's fantasy that particularly features tiny people, little worlds. I'm interested in scale. I'm interested in how these characters get us to think about nature differently, especially sort of micro environments, but also material things like dolls' houses, craftsmanship, and also ways of thinking about scale more generally, and sort of bringing together science and literature, which is an area that is developing at the moment and long overdue to be looked at, I think, more generally. So it all started working with a scientist who's nanotechnologist really, and we were looking at sort of shared interests. And for a long time I've been interested in dolls' houses, miniatures like that, but also the big question, which is one I'm writing on at the moment. I'm not ready to share, my theory yet, but when did the fairies in popular belief became small, so small that they could hide into a flower, that they're insect-like, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of work on this, but no sort of clear theory about it. So I'm sort of that was one of the main things. And of course, that I worked on Tolkien, and in his early mythology, the elves are elves and fairies, and some of them are very small and very winged, which is very much in opposition to what Tolkien said later, which is like, I hate those tiny little things, etc., etc. So there's a lot of interest, that comes from Victorian fairy painting as well, entomology, all sorts of things. So I worked with a scientist, and we put together the Tiny Alice project, which was trying to recreate the text of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in a tiny microchip in letters written in gold at nanoscale, not visible with a human eye, not visible via a microscope, not a common microscope. It had to be an electron microscope in a clean room. So we did all of this. We did a lot of, I know, I knew you'd like this, Nick.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge to exhibit, I can tell you. So we had to have somebody in the clean room, sort of, streaming into the room, etc., etc. But we did a lot of work with schools. I was back in Wales then, so I did a lot of work with schools, and we talked about nanotechnology and about how these things come up in literature. We used Alice's Adventures in Wonderland because, of course, she changes scales, drastically in the text. And I sat down and did the math, how big or how small she becomes at different times. And that got me interested into this whole topic. And then I came to Glasgow, we were launching all of this. And our librarian said, we have a collection of miniature books here, right? And the only thing I knew at that point about miniature books was the miniature books that come up in Little People stories. So if you remember The Borrowers by Mary Norton, Ariette and her father and mother and father, she has a miniature book collection, which are actual Victorian miniature books, but for her they are quite big. Actually, they're like big Bible books, the story says, so slightly oversized for her. So that again grounds the novel in terms of scale, in terms of sort of size of things, but she keeps her diary, and in later books, the idea is that what we read is Ariette's diary that's been written in one of those sorts of books, because some of them were calendars or almanacs, or, there was space to write notes in, believe it or not, because they are quite small. So yes, I got quite interested in all of this. We did an exhibition at Glasgow. I got quite, I've become sort of a bit of an expert on Scottish miniature books, which were, there was a huge line of production by George Bryce and Sons here in Glasgow, including in the 1901 exhibition. And then I started looking at older ones, or like 18th century ones, all the way to sort of some of the miniature late medieval Bibles. We have one example of that. So so all of this then tied in with writing the book and thinking about ideas of scale. So that's how it all came about. And of course, I started collecting them as well. Collecting them, you can't collect them unless you have a lot of money. But there are some examples that are sort of okay. And for me, that was also a teaching tool, right? So with The Borrowers, I have a collection of late Victorian objects that are described in the book, and I do bring them to the classroom, and one of them is a tiny book. So we're looking at sort of, again, how the text constructs a world at that scale, and how that interacts with mundane everyday things that actually modern children don't would a modern child today know what blotting paper is? Or a hat pin, so all of that, again, I did some outreach work in schools as well and brought some of this material. So it's been a lot of fun. So I know a lot more than most people about miniature books. And the thing that sort of got my attention with a charm is that the tradition of miniature books tends to be, the great majority of them, in any collections, are classical texts. So you get a lot of Epictetus, you get a lot of Sappho, you get a lot of sort of particular texts that would have been actually quite, Plato, etc., texts that would have been taught in schools. And the other half of the bulk of the material I've seen is devotional text. So you have whole
Really?
Bibles, whole it's the tiniest one we've got, which is a quarter of an inch, is is there's a whole Bible, like the whole Old
Wow.
Testament, New Testament, all the way through. But also a lot of them are Psalms. I have seen a lot of
Yeah.
examples of Psalms. And that's because I presume that, that's a text that's, for a lot of people would carry Psalms together with them anyway. It's quite an important textual tradition and a praying tradition. They are very, they're very, there's those human qualities apart from the devotional qualities to the Psalms as well, aren't they? They can be part of your personal sort of praying practice. So yes, I've seen lots and lots and lots of those. So I was thinking, okay, is there a chance here that we've got an actual, because in her tweet, J.K. Rowling didn't say it contains a psalm, it says Psalms. I was thinking, okay, that gets me thinking. And Nick very, very kindly had a go at dimensions. And I think we are at about the right size for a miniature book. So
Okay.
we have different hierarchies of miniature books. The ones that collectors want are the ones that are an inch high, no more than that, because then after that we're going to macro miniatures, and which are, they're interesting as well, but not as collectible. And then we have silly things like micro miniatures, which are stupidly small. But the 1 inch is a pretty standard sort of way of thinking about miniature books. And that's height, height we're talking about. And then I was looking at the picture, I'm thinking, well, it's got depth to it, it is possible. And then I was also thinking, okay, what about the cladding? The gold sort of the gold wrap around it. And I've got a couple of things here. I don't know how easily it'll be seen in on the screen, but this is the tiny book I'm using for teaching, which is The Life of Christ. It's a sort of retelling of the story of Jesus from the Gospels. It's not a miniature, it's slightly bigger, right? So if you see my finger here, it's an actual miniature book would be slightly smaller, so stop there. But it's all right, it's seen better days, I think. And the text here is not very, it's quite big, right?
It is. So it's very legible.
Yeah,
how
would
that be constructed? Because surely that's too small for movable type. Is that engraved or?
So no, the whole point was the craftsmanship. The whole point was that you would actually, emboss it exactly as you would do with other printing. And when we come to the tiny ones of the late 19th century, that's where you start having microphotography, which is a whole other sort of industry in many ways. But those traditional ones are made with traditional methods. And the idea is that the printer is, sometimes they would just make a few examples just to show what they can do. And then you'd have people that would, like the Bryce, a firm that would specialize on this kind of thing, that would make their money, on that. So, this.
Wait, one second, Dimitra. You're saying traditional. I mean, the traditional thing is obviously to have a scribe write the thing. You're talking post Gutenberg.
After the printing press. When I say traditional, after the invention of the printing press.
Yeah, I was just saying. So, but seriously, you're talking about they have printers making books that an inch high.
Oh yeah.
I'm just trying to imagine the type. It's just boggling, isn't it?
It is boggling, and Nick will have probably seen it in the UK. I filmed a little bit with some of those books for an episode of Bargain Hunt, which is an antiques sort of show here, and we showed some of the Glasgow ones. And again, the part of the battle was getting the camera close enough to my hands where I would handle them to show, and also it's. And then I was watching myself thinking, oh my God, I must have bitten my nails or something. You can see all the detail of the edges of my fingers because of course that's how it's going to be. Anyway, so I was thinking that so this is a certain example, and it's not a very good one. The very good ones I would never afford and be able to have at home. They are in museums or in important collections. But another thing that I picked up in an antique shop, and that was about 20 quid, is a silver sterling case for a miniature book, right?
Oh, wow.
So this is something that would have been made to fit, and protect. miniature, and that is an inch. That is the correct size. That is smaller than, if you see, yeah, there's the difference really there. So this is the right sort of thing. It's very thin. You could bend it with your fingers really, but it is actual sterling silver with its hallmark. Talking about hallmarks, right? And that would have been there to protect it. So, and I've seen some of those with clasps as well. This one doesn't have a clasp, but some of them do, and I've seen a number of them.
This is like an icon cover or something. I mean,
it's that kind of thinness. It's got a very sort of abstract, flowery. God, I'm trying to get it to focus here, but there could be all sorts of different things on those covers. So what I was thinking is it possible that we have a book of Psalms, a full miniature book of Psalms, which has been clad, in this way, in gold, obviously, in this case, and where some sort of fastening thing has been added to it to be on a charm bracelet. I will say I have never seen or heard miniature books carried as charms. They would be carried and they would be used, and a lot of the ones I've seen in collections are actually annotated, so people use them, and use tiny sort of very, very thin, sharp pencil to annotate them. But I've never seen them worn. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, right? It's difficult.
Wait a minute. You're telling me there's marginalia in a miniature book?
Yes. Yeah. I'll give you the link, if that's of interest to people watching this. But some of the books I selected for the exhibition here in Glasgow had annotations, and we've taken some pictures, and some of that, there's a Flickr show that shows some of them, so you can see, It's actually a classical Greek one, and the reader is translating as they're going through. Which is really nice to see for somebody who's who can read the original, shall we say so.
Yeah. I'm startled. You're saying that there were craftsmen, not like one crazy guy, but there were craftsmen, like an industry.
It is an industry
devoted to making miniature books. And would people carry these in their their coat pockets, or
they would. So we have
just whip them out there at the tea party and
so sometimes there would be curiosities. So sometimes they would be kept in curiosity cabinets, and they would be opened and shown as conversation starters or as curios or whatever. But there is enough evidence and enough textual evidence and inline sort of annotations in the books to show that they were carried around and they were used. They were a practical thing as well as a show off sort of craftsmanship thing. There's a whole theory a good 100 years ago about whether they were made to conceal them, that there was an issue of secrecy. I don't think there is enough evidence to say that. I think all of those were, the whole point was to show them off, right? And there are catalogs of them, and they were openly marketed, so I don't think there's an issue of secrecy there. But yeah, there was an industry for many. There's still, you can still find some of those, but of course nowadays with photography, etc., it's not the same kind of mystique of printing at that scale, I suppose.
All right, now our audience out there is by saying, John, are you kidding me? Why did you think of Demetra in this? Well, pull back the lens here on this miniature book. What Nick and I hope to contribute to this nascent field of Rowling studies. You're in a mature field of Tolkien studies. We're trying for a refocusing of the scholarship and the serious reader attention about Rowling's work on her Lake Springs, the biographical part of her story inspiration, her shed tools, her intentional artistry, and the golden threads, the plot points, the themes that run throughout her work. We're trying to bring Rowling studies more in line with all literary scholarship and notable authors, living and dead. Sure. One of the golden threads we talked about in the Conrecki series last summer was the embedded text.
Yeah.
Right. The books inside a book topos that is almost every book that Rowling writes. And I'm going to put those threads down. You want to see those Conrecki conversations? They're down there. All right. Detective fiction, though, is always about an embedded text. There's the narrative, which is written by the criminal, which prevents the detective from reading the real story of what happened. And the detective has to figure out what the hidden book is. Roland Galbraith often makes the narrative an actual book. or a narrative, or a printed thing like a Dumbledore's Chocolate Frog card, the Tales of Beetle the Bard, Bombyx Mori, Talbot's True Book, the Protections of Tycho Dornus. She likes real books inside the books because she wants to have the reader seeing a mirror. Inside the book, they're trying to figure out a book the same way the reader is trying to figure out the book. I mean, it's pretty meta, but she's writing almost all the times about the experience of reading and writing. So so all the other charms that we talked about. Nick and I did 2 shows on this with Elizabeth Baird Hardy, and all those charms were like symbolic representations. We didn't really, and we don't think there's actually going to be another charm bracelet inside this thing, but you're suggesting, and frankly, when I read your thing, Nick saw that show that you were talking about. So we thought of you because you're thinking that maybe there might be a Psalter miniaturized book inside this thing. Now that would be in keeping with Rowling's embedded text.
It wouldn't surprise. I mean, we can only speculate at this point, but it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all that there could be a sort of surprise like that, right? That a sort of revelation like that.
How do you think a Psalter miniaturized book would appear inside a Strike novel? Nobody there. We've never met anybody who's at all devotional. There's nobody's there is quoting from Coverdale's, Psalter. We don't get anything like that. But do you think we might finally get a Christian character or something, or there's a collector, that has this valuable silver hallmarked item?
We might, or could this be, where the epigraphs are going to come from in the next book? I don't know. That was my first reaction is this, because the idea of the miniature more generally, as I said, I've been thinking about miniatures for way too long. So, my brain goes in different places. But the idea of the miniature is, I mean, there are 2 things. One is distillation of the essence of something, right? That's what the charm is, isn't it? It's like trying to distill concepts, ideas, maybe even plot. We don't know what we will find out what these are, but based on what Robin gets from Strike, each of those means something, and it's a distillation. So this idea of the small capturing something much bigger in a way that is tangible, visible, right? In a way that maybe, there's a power to the small in that respect. The other one is control and possession, right? The idea that the world is too big, too complicated. There's too many things going on. Small things are things we can see all in one go. There is a sense of control. There's a sense of I can see the totality now. That's what I think a lot of people like about dolls' houses. Not people who play with dolls' houses, people who have the dolls' houses to look at them, and their house might be in chaos, but the doll's house is exactly right. So this idea of controlling, you could say the same about micro mosaics, or this all art, model railway sets. A lot of people also are thinking about or are playing around with ideas of control and something that guards against chaos potentially. So both of those things get me, that's what got me thinking about what is the Psalter, if it is a full Psalter, a full book of Psalms, what is that the distillation of? Is it the distillation of concepts, of ideas, going back to the to the narrative of how the Psalms came to be, the David story, a story about contrition or sort of, forgiveness or whatever we want to call it. Or is there going to be actual, is the book going to rely on the Psalms for epigraphs? And I can see that working with Evangeline as well, if it's the Longfellow one, but we don't know for sure, really, do we? And also with the whole Persephone thing, right? If we're going to go into the underworld and into the really, pretty dark places, the Psalms are quite good at exploring that, aren't they? So I'm wondering.
Seriously, that would be. We're going to talk about Sleep Tight Evangeline in just a minute. Some people are just checking just for that, but it would be such a great misdirection. This whiskey shambles band from Cincinnati, Ohio. Everybody's like, "Oh wow, what is that going to be the epigraphs?" And then she goes, and we get the King James Psalter. That would be such for the epigraphs. That would she's totally got. But Evangeline, as you say, Okay, we'll come back to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the
Nick.
Psalms are beautiful poetry, you know, and she's shown that she has a particular interest in poetry. I mean, I know for a lot of people that they can't, you know, that goes hand in hand with the devotional side of things, but the words themselves are beautiful. You know, they're just beautiful texts.
They do. They do work just as poetry.
Yeah.
I find it an incredible icon, if you like, the thought of this miniature book, particularly miniature devotional book. Has that appeared in literature before? Has a writer used
Not really, no. I mean,
that?
the only place I've seen it, as I was saying before, is in children's literature, especially when it comes to tiny characters, where you want to give them some sort of something to read or something to write on. There's a whole other, I mean, The Borrowers is the best known example. There's a whole other series of books about the doll's house. And it's quite a funny one because there's an antique old doll's house and then there's a 20th century plastic doll's house, and the two sets of dolls sort of interact. So it's very funny. And that also has a library, and that also has miniature books. And some of them are like, you know, pop songs from the 70s, you know, not your devotional or classical texts at all. But one of them is a diary, again, like with Arietti. One of them is a diary, and the story's unfolding, you know, and these characters then have an inner life and a, you know, and a story to write down and to tell. I haven't really seen it much apart from that.
All right.
But it is such a niche area. You really need to know that this thing exists to use it.
You mentioned the head of Persephone, you know, on that bracelet. It's on the 9th and the last link with the Psalter. I mean, those two things are on the last link. I mean, you shared your first thought in our comment thread about the Persephone charm, and you thought, wow, maybe Robin's not going to buy it in this book. You know, maybe Robin will survive. As our go-to authority on Greek mythology, I'm dying to know more about your thinking on three things. One, the specific charm, that head of Persephone, in its relation to the Cupid and Psyche myth template, the Strike series. It's pairing with the Psalter. I mean, you mentioned you thought that was interesting, but you didn't say why you thought that was interesting. and its position as the last charm on the bracelet. I mean, Nick said that I think Nick convincingly said she could have had as many links on that chain as she wanted, and she chose 9 for a reason and coupled things up. And so he thinks that those are the 9 parts of the book.
I think for Rowling, order is important.
Yeah.
I think there's no way at all that this
really
was just what do I think is pretty in this order. This means something.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that fits quite nicely with the idea of the miniature and hierarchies and orders, and, you know, things mean something in a certain way. Yeah.
Do you still think that head of Persephone charm is a sign that Robin's going to survive sleep type Evangeline?
I don't know. I'm worried. The more I think about it, the more I wonder whether the Persephone figure is going to be the sweary therapist.
Yeah.
Because, you know, she's the queen of the underworld. She also comes from the above world. She has a double life. You know what I mean? She can see down there, and she can understand above ground too. And there's also
many of our people are going to get that reference in that a psychologist is someone that goes into the chthonic, you know, into the things that are beneath the surface.
The dark.
And so there's always been someone who, when you talk about someone who digs, you know, someone who's going underneath and such like that. Okay, now I get it. So the connection between the sweary psychologist and Persephone is that she's talking to somebody who's, you know, in the land of the sun and such, but she'll go down into this darkness with them to dig out their unconscious, their subconscious mind. Okay, I get it. And so you think that's
the end. It's also the end of the trials of Psyche, isn't it? This is the very last sort of bit before she succumbs to her curiosity. There's something about curiosity. You know, the more I'm thinking about the Cupid and Psyche story, the more I think that there's a big theme of female curiosity there, which fits with Robin pretty well, if you know what I mean. They're sort of not wanting to leave any stone unturned, etc. Anyway, but yes, I think the fact that it's also the last bit of her story before that very scary bit where is she asleep? Is she dead? You know, what's going on exactly there?
And the Psalter, are you, I mean, Beatrice Groves has talked about, she thinks Psalm 23 is this. Are you suggesting the link there? I think Beatrice said this too, that you know, traveling through the valley of death, which is one of the key lines in this 23rd Psalm, is the connection. I mean, I've talked about Psalm 90 or 91 if you're using that Psalter. But anyway, Psalm 90 is the soldiers' Psalter, which is again all about traveling through, you know, near-death experiences. You know, the lion and the basilisk are all around, and the Lord is going to protect you from those things. Is that the connection you're thinking that, or
it possibly could? It's also, you know, it again in the tradition about how the book of Psalms was written, right, and what it meant to David. It's also his own journey of redemption, isn't it? You know, his own sort of journey of soul searching and sort of coming through the other way. I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether I'm just basing this on the way I grew up, you know, knowing about this text as a text that is very much associated with sort of having sinned and going through the catharsis and sort of coming the other side, feeling that there is, you know, there is redemption, there is salvation still.
Again, for our audience, Demetria grew up as an Orthodox Christian. In the Orthodox Church, the services have what they call kathismata, which are the collections of the Psalms. And every week, the Psalter is read through the cycle of services. And during, you know, intense periods like we're about to enter into in Great Lent, it's read twice a week. So I mean, the Psalter is really the skeletal system of all public worship in the traditional church, and so it's and to bring it into the Anglican communion, it's an object of it's a the Old Testament specifically, Old Testament in general, but the Psalter specifically as the devotional aspect of the Old Testament takes on a much larger aspect than it does today in most Protestant and Catholic worship.
Yeah.
I mean, the man who was responsible really for the abolition of slavery in the United Kingdom, famously had the longest psalm, 118 or 119, however you enumerate it, had that memorized, and every day before he went to Parliament to argue for the abolition of slavery would on his walk, he said it was the exact timing of the walk to say that psalm, which is quite long, you know, it's because it's an alphabet psalm, you know, every that's,
I mean, I remember quite a few of them still by heart in obviously in the Greek, you know, in the 70, how do you say that in there must be a term, right? The translation
of the Septuagint.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, μετάφραση των 70 we say in Greek, but yeah, I wouldn't. I was trying to find the word there. So that's the versions I know.
Orthodox Church. Today's the meening of the Lord in the Orthodox Church, which is really the feast of Saint Simeon, who is the man, one of the translators who survives to meet Christ in the temple. Anyway, a lot of Psalter stuff here. I can really see, maybe it's wish fulfillment fantasy here, but I can really see Rowling getting into that as sort of the backdrop, because she's into 19th century poetry, and you can't read 19th century poetry at any kind of depth and not realize that the Psalter and the worship texts of the Anglican Communion and the Catholic Church, which was coming out of the catacombs basically.
I mean,
at the time.
There's allusions in a lot of 19th century poetry to the Psalms. You know, it's there. If you know them, you see them everywhere.
Yes,
it's the embedded text inside the text that she's been using as her backdrop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose. But the other thing about Persephone, before I forget, is so I still, you know, I was asked in the comments in the last time I was here with you about, you know, what compendium of Greek mythology should I read? I was like, I don't know what to tell you, because there isn't a good, recent edition that does that. I still rely on my 5-volume, the Greek sort of, there's 5 books of those that sort of have all of the sources and all of the, but that's in modern Greek, so no good for most people. But I was looking back at the at Persephone in that, and what I had sort of forgotten or pushed away in my mind is the idea that Persephone as a deity might be pre-Greek, might be coming from the Phoenicians, or that sort of corner of the world. And the name definitely is in terms of Indo-European roots, etc., seems to be pre-Greek. And there are a number of cognate sort of deities around. And the other one that actually links with that quite interestingly is how in Apuleius, when we get Cupid and Psyche, we also get Isis and Osiris in there as well. And the connection of is Aphrodite, are Aphrodite and Persephone in that story so doubles of each other? Is there a sense of the goddess of love above and the goddess, the most beautiful goddess below, and they're both sort of sides of the soul again, if we go down that more sort of Platonic or allegorical tradition. So yeah, there's some interesting things there about wider motifs from the Near East sort of area, and there's a lot of scholarship on all of this. Too much probably to get into it here.
I'm intrigued by your tentative identification of Persephone as the sweary therapist. Now, we know Prudence, which of course is a brilliant name for an illegitimate child, but we know that Prudence is a Jungian psychologist, and the Jungian interpretation of the psyche myth is about the actualization of feminine identity, which is something we haven't really explored. We've been looking at the sort of Spencerian Eros, Anti-Eros, or the false Cupid. Which of those two do you think would be most helpful as a lens to look at this myth?
So are you thinking about, are we talking about the Jungian connection here now?
Yeah.
Or
do you think there's any that is a useful avenue for us to start
in the sense that Jung is interested in archetypes and in sort of mythical figures that cut across cultures? Yeah, definitely. That brings together what I was saying before about potentially Isis or pre-Greek sort of material there potentially. I mean, this is actually a flourishing area in as opposed to Freudian psychology, which has just gone out of the window. I don't think it's being used much at all, apart from literary criticism, where it seems to still be a thing.
I was going to say, boy.
that which is fascinating, because I have to tell students, right, we're reading all of this, but that in terms of sort of actual modern psychology, a lot of that is gone out the window. It has been debunked. But Jungian psychology is still very much an active sort of area of practice, an area of study. And I think in some ways it's captured something that's both universal and specifically cultural. That the problem with theories of myth like Jung's is that they tend to be very universalist. There tends to be this idea that all cultures at all times had, some structures that were the same. And, we're all different generations here. We could even say, all from different places, not from different countries. And we see clashes of culture all the time. We say, culturally, that means something different to me. So it's very difficult to sort of support the idea that there is anything universal. But at the same time, some things we all have in common, right? We were talking about miniatures before and scale. The human body is a part of how we understand scale, right? We all, there are some things that we share as a species. So I think there are strengths to Jungian psychology for sure, and there's a reason why Prudence is in that sort of camp, right? That's not accidental. So yeah, I would think that's definitely worth looking at.
we know there's a real tension in Rowling's work between Jungian interpretations of alchemy and the perennialist interpretations of alchemy, which are really, there's a great division there. I mean, the perennialists despise Jung, and Jung, what did he care about? He didn't. The perennialists weren't really, in flourished medicine. So, in Rowling's work, if you want to take a Jungian alchemical interpretation of her work, it's certainly possible. But the perennialist stuff, it leans so much more towards literature. I mean, the perennialist interpretations of alchemy and Shakespeare and such is really to me, it's the ground for these things. And the cover of the core text on alchemy for the perennialists is Burckhardt's Alchemy, and it's a picture of Rubeus Hagrid. I mean, there's a giant with male and female, and he's on top of a giant snitch, the golden ball with the wings and a dragon. You're just like, oh well, I think she's read this book. I think this is so. I'm really going to be curious about the Persephone and how she's going to interpret it, because a perennialist interpretation of myth, a la Kumaraswamy and company, is very different than a straight Jungian feminine identity. But as a feminist and someone that's been very involved in the whole transgender controversy, let's say, those ideas really resonate. That actualization of feminine identity, especially in that a woman has to, in that myth, has to, in a sense, when she goes into her unconscious mind, into hell, she has to put aside all of her ideas of nurturance and fostering and fostering care. All that's really her aspects of sacrificial love, where she identifies self, she allied self and other, and takes care of these people. That the tower says to her, honey, if you go into hell as a woman, you ain't coming out. And she succeeds, but as soon as she comes out, she looks at the box and thinks, I could use a little of this, and she falls to that. So I mean, it's again, I'll put again. I put the Jungian interpretations of the myth, which are there's a library of it. They love this myth. Down below.
But then I think that comes on the back of who is the who could be the model of the female hero in myth, right? Because all of the previous mythography was focused on the male hero. We've got, I mean, most people would know Campbell, obviously, but there's people long before Campbell, like Otto Rank and Ranking, etc., talking about the pattern, the hero's life. And there's been a gap, a glaring gap for years. Where's the female hero's journey? And in some ways, the Jung is pretty good at sort of filling in that gap. And that on the other hand,
Rowling has Robin, the psychologist, as Psyche is such a tight fit. And the agonies that she goes through. I mean, the woman is like, she's got her own room at Casualty. The woman is just like, oh yeah, she's back. Here she is.
So that's the thing. She's gone through a lot already physically. So I'm wondering whether then in the book to come we see more of the inner, searching of the soul, the dark recesses of the mind, etc., rather than any more physical stuff happen to her, which I think would be a bit much. Yeah. And also, I suppose the last thing, and just on the Jung thing, I was teaching Lion the Witch on the Wardrobe last week, a week before, something like that, to my master's students on fantasy. And there was this huge, obviously, discussion about the Christian allegory, and is it meant to be there? Should we be looking for it? Does it define the book? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Etc. But there were also a number of people who, right from the beginning, like from at least as back as the 70s, were looking at C.S. Lewis from a Jungian perspective and thinking, actually, the dying and resurrected God motif is something that Jung is also interested in, and he's looking at stories from other cultures as well. And there's nothing, I mean, there's some studies that bring the two together quite nicely, and it works. So, yeah.
Well, you bring up the Inklings, and I mean, Rowling's using myth inside her books as a template.
Mm.
You know, it's a touchstone. She's not, you know, locked onto it. Like she has to follow every step. And we're going to do a show where we talk about every step of the Cuban segment and see what correspondences we can find. I'm pretty sure that show is going to see, well, she plays with this, but it's not like the myth.
It's not quite like that. Yeah.
And you know, Rowling's a close reader and admirer of J.R. Tolkien. And I know you've spent, I mean, maybe this last week you started looking at Tolkien too. You're doing, anyway. I mean, it's more evident and clear. Her devotion to Tolkien is more evident in the pointers in her work than to her own testimony and interviews. She's really tried to backpedal from the whole Tolkien connection, but it's hard
like
if you're
every
Tolkien
fantasy author around, to be honest, because it's a long shadow to escape in some ways. Yeah.
How does her use of myth contrast with that of Tolkien and Lewis?
Oh gosh, that is a big question. Because we have to start with how does it work in Lewis and Tolkien? You see what I mean? So Tolkien does it in many different ways. He at times, you know, uses a micro story, you know, within a larger construction of a world. For Tolkien, consistency is absolutely crucial. So there has to be a world that has, you know, an inner consistency of reality, that things fit with each other. But he's also full of anachronisms, and most people don't see it because it's so well done that it's sort of hidden away. So, you know, there's a whole Beowulf narrative in the Riders of Rohan scene in The Lord of the Rings that most people don't see because it feels like it fits quite nicely. Or, you know, the whole Beren and Luthien story is an Orpheus story reversed. You know, we can very easily read all of that. Or, you know, I've written quite a bit about how the story of Turin Turambar in the first age of Middle Earth, and the Silmarillion is both an Oedipus story and you know, Old Norse, you know, Sigurd and the dragon story. And some of those, you know, he's acknowledged himself. Some others, you know, they're pretty obvious. So there are micro stories, and then there are the macro things where the world itself, Tolkien's world itself, has a mythological structure. You know, there are tales within it that are myths, and there are tales within the world that are legends, and there are tales within the world that are folk tales. So the whole anthropological idea of how myth works in a society also works in Middle Earth. Again, I've got a chapter coming out on this very soon. Lewis is slightly different in the sense that there is no consistency. Consistency goes out the window. It's all in the sink, you know, all sorts of different sort of creatures and traditions mixed together, which is the same in Tolkien, but he hides it better. But I think, you know, the big structural element of parts of the Christian story are very much, you know, underlying the Chronicles of Narnia. It's impossible, you know, once you see it, you can't unsee it anymore. And I think the reason why a lot of children readers don't see it is because we are in a, I don't know how to call it, post-Christian, you know, culture. So these narratives aren't as, you know, as well known as previous generation would see it straight away. I don't think there would be any question about that. But at the same time, Lewis is also, you know, I mean, you probably know Michael Ward's book on Planet Narnia, right? He's very good at hiding stuff away too. You know, he's, you know, Michael's got a really convincing argument there about a whole other structure that's going on, which is sort of, you know, medieval, but also slightly Platonic, but also slightly, you know, sort of medieval astronomy and classical at the same time, because the Middle Ages are a mix of things anyway. You know, we have the classics are still being read and discussed and used allegorically anyway, in conjunction with, you know, sort of native material, well, indigenous, whatever you want to call it, material from, you know, from the Northern European context. I think Lewis is more interested in, he's better at pace, I would say, maybe. The stories move really fast, if you know what I mean. And they are, you know, they are, and I think the big difference with Tolkien is this connection to our world, right? This idea that the children are being given access to something that they also have access to in our world, but they get a different sort of access. You know, Aslan exists in our world too, that sort of idea. Well, with Tolkien, we open the book and we are elsewhere. There is no clear connection with our world. There's a whole sort of mirror world or alternative world that is being developed. So there's also, I suppose, time. You know, Lewis does the Narnia books really fast, as was said before, within 7 years, the 7 books. Tolkien publishes 2 things and he's been working for 60 years on them. So there is that depth, that it's not an illusion. There's actually hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pages of stuff that don't make it onto the page, but give that, depth and richness. So yeah, with Rowling, it's again both things probably. There is this all in the sink tradition from Lewis that other people are doing too. The which one is that latest one that I was looking at and I'm thinking that's the same line as Lewis and Rowling, and gosh, it's gone off my head. Impossible Creatures by
Catherine Rundell.
That's it. Yes.
Wonderful.
Which again, it's that idea of sort of mixing traditions in a way that might feel haphazard, but it's not. It sort of works.
Yeah.
But I think, I think, after reading John's thesis, I was more or less convinced that there's the whole other structure that's going on there. Both in the Harry Potter books, but more importantly in the strike novels, where you don't expect it. This is not fantasy. This is a completely different genre, and that's where the parallels with Shakespeare, with the older tradition of sort of literature, which could be realistic, could be stories that could happen, in reality, but have all of this underlying structure behind them, works really well.
Wow. Talking of structure, so the big news this week is the serious striking A team from strikefans.com. That's Bill, shout out to all of them, Bill, Badly Wired Lamp, Ludicrous Monica, Suke Moorhen, met with J.K. Rowling. And amongst the things they talk about, we know she gave them the title for Strike 9, which is going to be Sleep Tight, Evangeline. Fortunately, I had my phone in front of me when she tweeted. So I managed, So I managed to do a really quick search before all the Google search lines get polluted with J.K. Rowling's new book. And I'm reasonably confident that the title, at least, has come from a really obscure American blues band called the Whiskey Shambles. It was a track initially released way back in 2014. J.K. Rowling, I'm reasonably certain, a cutout of J.K. Rowling copyrighted that phrase, Sleep Tight, Evangeline, back in 2023. And the group released an album with the title Sleep Tight, Evangeline just last year. So I'm confident, and I think it's such an unlikely phrase. I think that is somehow, and I'd love to hear the story of how she heard about that title, but that's where the title comes from. Do I think the epigraphs are going to come from the lyrics of this band? No, not least because until very early last year, there were no lyrics available for any of the songs. So that the lyrics that I scraped together quickly from the post came from the auto generation from the videos that are on there. There is no published lyrics for them that I'm aware of. If some in the comments down below, if somebody knows where I can find the lyrics to these guys, please let me know. I'm not a music lover, and it would be torture for me to have to listen to all the songs and write them out. So please. However, John very quickly, because we had an emergency phone call, as we always do when something like this occurs. It wasn't the middle of the night this time, was it, John? But John very quickly pointed that Longfellow, of course, has an epic poem called Evangeline. Now, we've had Aurora Lee for the Ink Black Heart. And when I asked J.K. Rowling John's question, which was, is this the text within the text for Ink Black Heart? She replied, yes. So we have confirmation from J.K. Rowling herself. That's an important text. We've got the ring and the book for the Hallmark Man. That is the template for the Iron Bridge mystery. Absolutely. There's a post going to come out on that sometime next week. There you are, John. I've made a commitment. I'm going to do that post sometime.
Whoa!
You've said it now.
Anybody who's made a commitment to read the Ring in the Book, it acknowledges that. But you're saying now you had some doubts before we talked about this, but you think now that's definitely it.
Absolutely. I think there's more. There's more that I'm not sure is going to make it into my post next week. I think it's in conversation with Aurora Lee. I'm probably going to need a bit more time to put that into words.
Wow, the Browning scholars are gonna love to hear this. This is great.
But yes, certainly in terms of a story template for the Iron Bridge mystery, there's just too many correspondences. That's absolutely it. So, two things: is this a conspiracy from Rowling to force me to read epic poetry? And do you think this could be a likely spring of epigraphs for Sleep Tight, Evangeline?
You say okay. You say Longfellow's poem.
Yeah.
There's also a poem by Poe, which I don't think is epic, but
yeah.
The Longfellow poem it was wildly popular at the time. Nobody reads it anymore, really. Which is a pity, I suppose. But Longfellow generally has gone, out of fashion. Hiawatha is an absolutely fascinating text as well. That actually it's in more children's literature anthologies than it is, than it's read by adults nowadays. And that's a whole other discussion. So I say Evangeline. So I don't know whether I'm right there or I'm wrong. And that's because the name became a popular female name after the poem. As often it happens, you get a text, like, the name Wendy didn't exist before Peter Pan, right? And then you get a lot of Wendy's afterwards. And I know, so Evangeline Walton, you might know as a fantasy author, for example, that's a typical case of somebody of that generation. And she definitely pronounced it Evangeline, but then it might be that, but I don't know how Longfellow meant it to be. The meter works with both. It's a very weird meter. It's a dactylic hexameter, which is sort of a classical meter, really. So if I read you the beginning, I used to show my undergraduates the beginning just to explain them what the heck is dactylic hexameter, because it's difficult. So it says pum 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 pum. So this is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlocks, bearded with moss and in garments green indistinct in the twilight. It's pretty. And the English sounds a bit weird in that meter, but it's got that, hypnotizing slightly.
Yeah.
And Longfellow, Hiawatha is anapestic, which is also unusual for English. So he had a particular fondness for trying different things with meter. But that's neither here nor there. I don't think they fell out of fashion for that. I don't think that's the reason why Longfellow isn't being read as much. It's because I suppose a lot of these stories today are seen as either too sentimental potentially, or with Hiawatha, we know a lot more about Native Americans now than he would have known at the time. So it all might feel a bit sort of broad brush, etc., etc. But Evangeline is. I mean, it's a romance. It's a romantic story with a sort of good ending, but not quite good ending, which fits with the whole Psyche and Cupid thing. Do you know what I mean? That's the other thing I was thinking. Okay, if it is that Evangeline, it sort of makes sense because they do get together at the end, but they sort of die in each other's arms.
There we go. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Like, come on, don't do this to me. Seriously, just like I had thought. Maybe Persephone is the sweary therapist, and I was getting myself, geared towards, okay, she's going to be fine. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, just don't do this. It's a story it's a very long story of tortured love but it does get vindicated at the end, even if it's, at the very end and they're both very old. And as I said, they sort of die. There is that hope still there. There are also, I was looking also into the poem and looking at, I remember some scenes where she sleeps and dreams, and the dreams are important, but it's too long. I need to sit down and read it properly again. It's been a while. So I was wondering about this idea again. I was thinking, does J.K. Rowling see parallels there between the Psyche and Cupid story in the Evangeline story, in the sense that we have that weird sleep? That is it, the Stygian sleep. What is that? Is it actual sleep, or is it death? But it's also it's a particular story of people who are persecuted and sort of being thrown out of their community. And that fits quite nicely with the idea of the detectives as outsiders, not always seeing the bits of society that other people don't see. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether this will be a situation where we have epigraphs from a couple of different texts, right? Like we've seen before in Strike novels. So will it be some Psalms and some Evangeline and some other stuff? I don't know. But to me, what I was thinking of straight away is, oh my gosh, there's a moth. This is a sign, surely. There's a moth on my window right now. There's a moth on my window. Psyche, yes, I know. She's come to say hello. Yes. So to me, that was bringing to mind sort of parallels with Cupid and Psyche story.
Yeah.
Because of the very long-winded sort of they're sort of getting us to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait until at the end, we get some sort of resolution, which is and isn't a resolution. So that chimes with Cupid and Psyche pretty well. Will it chime with the ending of the Strike stories? I don't know. I hope it's not going to be as tortuous as that. Yeah, that's as far as I can say, really.
All right. You're a native Greek speaker, though your accent is Welsh. I'm always going to be confused here. This is
too long in Wales. Too long.
I was like, wow. I gotta just crossing all my categories, Dimitri. You just explode all my categories here. You're a native Greek speaker. What does Evangeline mean in Greek? Is it a common name in Greek, or is it a virtue name? Yeah,
it's pretty common, but without the N. So in Greek, it would be Evangelia without the N. Evangelia, I suppose you would say.
It's funny. The only Orthodox Christian I know was a woman whose name is in English they call her Evangeline, but her given name, she was born a Protestant. She was raised as a Protestant. Was Wendy. And I was just like, oh,
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, she's got
sure. No, I've got.
Rowling is really into virtue names, because we saw that in Cretus Barebone, which was probably a reference to an Englishman named Praise God Barebone, who they say that he gave his son the name, if Jesus Christ had not died for me, thou hast been damned, Barebone. They call him Nicholas. I like that. Nicholas is much easier, victory of the people. That's great. But I was just wondering.
It is a virtue name. I mean, it means what Evangelium means. A good announcement, the good news, right? The good message of the Gospels, and actually translates quite nicely. Even in a pre-Christian context, it would mean the same thing. The word hasn't changed, right? It's the exact same word and same meaning, without the N. So it is a virtue name. It's very, very common in modern Greece today. I have a cousin. I know lots of Evangelias. So it's also the name day is on the Annunciation Day.
Really?
Yeah. So there's a nice link
because okay, that's great, because the angel actually that's the angel, that's the messenger in.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. I have I have two daughters that are nuns at Holy Angels, and so I'm beaten up with that a lot. This is people were laughing on the Nick posted in 6 minutes his findings. No, it was a couple of hours, but he did a tweet in 6 minutes saying where this thing was from, and then wrote the post in a couple of hours. And people immediately said, "Oh, John's going to have a field day with this," because the good news of the gospel is the incarnation of Christ. That's why it's Annunciation, and his victory over death via crucifixion and resurrection. And the good news is that you can participate in that victory over death by becoming part of his mystical body. And this is the good news. And that's not just John's little denominational fetish. Rowling in this charm bracelet has loaded it with Christian images.
I was listening to the two episodes. There's so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, okay, this is not just John's little hobby horse. you know, I wrote a book on the Harry Potter stuff, but all of a sudden we're seeing Rowling trying, I think, to say, hey, this is not just a London detective story. I'm doing something different here. I'm writing a psychological and spiritual, you know, allegory inside these books. If that you didn't get that from Troubled Blood, you know, read more Hogwarts Professor books, because we really went into that. Now, I'm excited about that, and especially you've really got me going here, Dimitra, with the possibility that the Psalter might be the embedded text, because boy, the epigraphs you can pull from the Psalter.
Exactly. That's what I think. The possibilities are. Yeah. The other thing, I just thought of something about Evangeline now that I just came into my head, and if I don't say it, I'll forget it. You're talking about, I mean, what evidence do we have that Rowling, I mean, apart from what is in the books, about how much he's read of Tolkien? In terms of sort of outside the text evidence, do we know?
Okay, so we have unreliable evidence of people who knew Rowling, that she read Tolkien. We have evidence from her ex-husband that she had a set of Lord of the Rings that she was constantly reading in Portugal. Again, unreliable evidence. But I think the age that she was going to school and going to university, which is 5 years, her age group was 5 years ahead of mine. And I know that age group through to my age group and some distance beyond. That was sort of the shared text among the geeky crew.
Yeah.
So I think it's more credible than not that she was familiar with it.
Yeah. I'm wondering about. Go for it, John.
There's a whole chapter in my book, you know, about Harry Potter's library bookshelf.
Yeah.
That is really just about Tolkien and Lewis, but the Tolkien stuff is voluminous, you know, from the giant spiders. I mean, it's hard to read the names of the, you know, the names of the pubs and things like that. I mean, it's really the hat tipping.
Has anybody written about the Dumbledore connection, or is that an apocrypha?
Oh, the Dumbledore. Forgive me, my Tolkien stuff is, you know, I don't speak Elvish anymore. You know,
no, he uses the word for the Dumbledore as a bumblebee in his very early poems that only if you are really into Tolkien you would know. But I'm wondering at times because that's very weird. It's a very strange, and you know, you either know that word or you don't.
It's going to assume that that's a reference to Hardy, because in the same chapter that Hardy uses
Hagrid,
Hagrid and Dumbledore appear in the same chapter. And so
okay.
But
Butterbeer, I think, is a more strong link, I think, to Tolkien.
The reason why I was asking is because I have a feeling that every fantasy author reads at some point on fairy stories, which is Tolkien's theorizing of what fantasy is and what it's about and how it links, you know, again, with very, you know, for him, very Christian things, or at least spiritual things, you know, at least sort of going beyond the mundane, or, you know, beyond the sort of, you know, beyond the veil, etc., etc. And in that one, Tolkien's theory of what fantasy is about and what it's for is to arrive at what he calls the eucatastrophe, right? The unexpected good ending. So the story leads you all the way to think this is going to fail, this is going to go really badly, but somehow, you know, out of it, well, you're convinced completely that this is not going to work. It somehow turns around, and you get that unexpected grace. He uses the word grace there, interestingly, which is again very much in its Christian term. And the other word he uses for eucatastrophe is evangelium, which is like the good news, again, the evangelium. So I'm wondering whether I'm wondering whether there is, you know, the Evangeline there is maybe also a bit of a hint at, you know, bigger discussions in fantasy practice, you know, because Tolkien there is really not writing so much as an academic or somebody who is writing fantasy, which is you know, that's why that essay is so sprawling, and, you know, it's not his usual sort of very tight academic sort of thing. It's got so much going on, and he's reflecting on his own practice.
The other Tolkien Rowling scholar besides yourself is Dr. Amy H. Sturgis.
Oh, Amy,
and,
sure.
and Amy uses the word eucatastrophe to describe the ending of Deathly Hallows. That that you can't. I mean, when you see everything is falling to pieces. The Dark Lord has got this, and then Harry rises from the dead, and oh my goodness, we turned this thing over. And yet it's done. As Rowling likes to say, she has better jokes than Tolkien. You have the poltergeist walk in saying,
there's a lightness to it. Yes, that is one of its strengths. I think the Harry Potter books are. Yeah, there's a light touch to them that people, I think, underestimate and undervalue.
Yeah. Oh well. We gotta tie together all these pieces of conversation.
Is that possible?
This is like one of those comedian things where they say to the comedian, okay, the Psalter, the Coverdale Psalter, and the Jessica Mitford and Trump's tariffs dashboard. Give us a paragraph where you have all of those things in one go. We're going to do something like that because we'll include the Psalter there. But is there a thread joining the Psalter, the head of Persephone, miniaturized books, and the title "Sleep Tight, Evangeline"? I mean, that's
going to be the next book, and we're waiting for it.
Book 9, strike 9.
Looks like. I'd like to circle back to the miniatures, if that's all right, which is where we started, and this idea of distilling the essence, right? Because these charms have been obviously put together with a lot of care, and so has the charm bracelet that the fictional one that Strike gives to Robin, and I'm just, and all of that fits quite nicely with this idea of the text within the text, right? A text that does that compacting work, that distillation work, that brings together the narrative we all read on the page, the counter narrative, that is being revealed, the narrative that the murderer has tried to obscure, or actually a number of different narratives, because in Hallmark Man we had all sorts of possibilities there. And then the epigraphs at the same time. There's a big discussion in children's literature at the moment in terms of the use of epigraphs, right? And generally, what epigraphs do in a text, why have them, right? Why have them there at all? Are you showing off? Are you alienating readers? Are you, in children's lit, for example, are you ticking the box of this is classic literature and I'm following in the footsteps of whoever came there before? So yeah, there's something interesting also in the creative process of all of that. Are these texts that are sparks of inspiration? Are they there before the story has been written? Because we know with some. I was teaching the other day. Sorry, I teach a lot of fantasy, as I'm sure you will know. Richard Adams's Watership Down, right? And we know, for example, that these epigraphs were added after the story was written, and most of the epigraphs sort of were added in the written text, because it started as an oral story. But there's also evidence of other authors who start with a structure that's there before, and the story is built with sparks of inspiration that come out of those texts, or it could be a combination of the two, right? So I would say that the Cupid and Psyche, and I think this is John's point, not mine really. That's the intertext that's been there all the way through, and we will still see elements of that, and the Persephone thing fits quite nicely there. But at the same time, if we end up with Evangeline or the Psalter or both of them, as intertexts, it will be interesting to at some point have a sense of how much of that drove the rest of the story. Maybe the murder bits, because I think the story of Robin and Strike, she already knows what she's doing there. Whether we like it or not is but I think she knows. I'm wondering how much of the other narratives around that big narrative are sparked by these texts, or whether that, as she's reading, she's realizing, oh my God, there are similarities here with what I'm doing with these other texts, and she brings them in later on to illuminate what she's doing, to sort of give us a sense of an interpretation. I don't know how many strike readers actually do this thing of you read the chapter and then you go back and check the epigraph again. Yeah. But that is, that again is an interesting practice of reading. A lot of people don't, go straight and, they're just interested in what happens next. But sometimes the epigraphs seem to refer to what's to happen in the chapter, and sometimes they seem to capture something that's just come before, or they're a linking bit. So yeah, all of those things, little links in a bracelet chain, potentially. That's trying to be very poetic here.
One of the projects we're doing, Demetra, is we're charting each one of the parts, the chapter sets inside the book, and that makes it seems to work really well. For Hallmark Man, I did it for Troubled Blood and Running Grave. Each one of the books can be understood in that context as a charm bracelet. Yeah. That you're seeing these things. You're suggesting, which is totally new idea to me, that Rowling wants you to read each chapter and go back to the beginning and then reflect on it, that loop that thing, here's the beginning of it, but come back to this note. Yeah. I'm prepping you, but I want you to come back and then close that ring before you go to the next piece. Yeah. Oh my. Gosh, one more project, Demetra. Thank you very much. That's what we needed. Yeah,
in the ring and the book, there are these two objects. There is the book, the yellow book, and there is the ring, which is a copy of an Etruscan ring. The book, of course, is the record of the trials. The ring does not exist. It's not referred to at all in the text. It's mentioned just at the very beginning of the poem and at the very end of the poem. The yellow book is a real object. So it's now, I think, in the Bodleian Library, and it was donated by his ancestors with a ring, which is not
the ring.
The ring. So I think for Browning as well, the ring, like a bracelet, the ring was the poem. Again, work to be done. I need to chart that ring structure within the ring and the book. But I think within his mind, that his construct, he was crafting ring.
Nick, this is too much. You've already blown up Rowling studies. Are you going to take on Browning studies now? I mean, this is wild. I mean, there's a university in Texas, Baylor University, that has a museum which is really devoted to the Brownings. I mean, you can see their apartments in Italy in the upper floor of the museum. I mean, it's madness. But Nick, I think you're going to get an appointment there. You're going to. I mean, this is mad. And you're going to blame me because I looked at the epigraphs and said you've got to read the ring in the book. You're going to say
you've got such a track record of just looking at the quantity of epigraphs and what the epigraphs are saying and saying, oh well, that's the text within the text, and you're always right.
Well, yeah, great. Yeah, it's great. This is great. It's more like. This is more like the guy who says, I think California is in that direction. And then somebody has to
send somebody else to California. Yes, exactly.
That's right. Nick has to walk to California and say, he was right. Here it is. Thanks, Nick, for making me look like a genius, but I didn't do the walk. Brother. That's all on you. Wow, I can't wait to read that post. Demetra, I know you've got to run. Thank you, as always. I thank you for all of the serious strikers out there that are just like, oh, yeah, Demetra, she's got all this stuff. You're a curiosity cabinet yourself. I mean, it's just like there's something else in there that's important to what we're doing. Thank you so much. God willing that this is a miniature book.
Fingers crossed.
If that's a bullseye, Demetra, it'll make the reading of this book into such a different sort of thing, right? Like, oh, Demetra called this,
Oh, I don't know. It's fun. That's the thing. We're having fun, right? That's the main thing.
I mean, Nick and I always, I get kind of snobby and say, we don't do the next book. We're the fourth generation. And so we talk about all of the books. And we talk about the golden threads and the lake springs and the tools in the shed. We're not really just hanging on Rowling's every word. And then Rowling tweets, and Hogwarts Professor is Nick's got the tweet up, and John's going through Evangeline, you know, like, oh, what happened to those Acadians? Where did they wind up? You know, oh my goodness, it's a Romeo and Juliet finish. You know, oh my goodness. Yeah, so we're fans. We're fans. We're snob. I'm a snob. Nick's not a snob. I'm a fan and a snob. And I really am so excited about Strike 9. Nick, when is Strike 9 coming out? Have we got a pattern for when title is announced to when?
So we have no pattern, and you should know now by long experience. I think I owe Beatrice Groves a case of 6X beer, of Doombar beer. Because we posted our predictions for when we thought the Hallmark Man was going to come out. I'm always wildly optimistic, so I'm going to say by the summer, but that's not, of course, true. It's not that long ago Rowling posted that she completed part 1. I would be very pleasantly surprised if it was released this year.
I'm expecting it next year, to be honest with you. Knowing the publishing industry and how it works, even if she's done, it's not going to be in our hands for a while.
He's doing a lot of advanced work, though. That charm bracelet at Christmas time, and then announcing the title in January. You know, I'm gonna join Nick on the hopeful team and be like, oh, come on, you know, let's have it in September.
I will take it happily. You know what I mean? I won't complain.
That's right. You know. It's a mini book after all, right? I mean, get those nanotechnologists out there and send me this thing in a 1-inch binder. That's what I want to see. All right. Again, thank you so much, Dimitra.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much,
Salute.
Dimitra. Take care.
Bye, everyone.